My name is Rahab, Rahab the harlot, and I live in Canaan, in the city of Jericho. We have many gods in our city, and oftentimes even our worship rituals, believe it or not, include acts of sex as worship. Now, I live on the wall. Jericho has two walls, two great big walls, and I live at the gate in my home on top of that wall. So I'm really one of the first homes that sojourners come and see. Now, I'm Rahab the harlot, but they call my place an innkeeper. We all know that's code for, well, you get the picture. I had been hearing of many of the exploits of the Israelites, and they were our enemy. And I had heard how their God, one God, we have many gods. How can their one God do all that he does? But this one God, he delivered the Israelites from the Egyptians. And when they were fleeing, they were surrounded behind them from Pharaoh and his army and the chariots and the horses. And in front of them was this huge land mass of water everywhere, all over the land. And God split the seas so that they could even walk across on dry land, the Israelites, with their one God. And when they got to the other side, God, that same one God, took the waters and completely surrounded and drowned all the Pharaoh and his men and their chariots. And the Israelites were free, finally, from the bondage. And so they began to take over the land and come into the land of Canaan with Joshua, their leader. And they utterly destroyed at least 2 cities and their kings that I know about. And now they were on their way to Jericho, where I lived. When we heard this, the men in our city, their hearts melted. And there was not a single ounce of courage in their bones. And we were all shaking and scared for our lives. In the midst of all of these stories, one night, I heard knocking at my door. That wasn't unusual, knocking at my door at night. And I opened my door, and there stood 2 men. Also, not unusual, at my door, 2 men knocking to come in. And I let them in. That's our culture. I let them in. But I could tell they weren't the regular men that I serviced. They had a different atmosphere about them. And I began to share with them how frightened our people were of the Israelites. And I realized these men are spies from Joshua and his tribes, and thousands of men coming after us. They were so kind. So I took them upstairs to hide them, because I knew that the king's men in Jericho would be looking for these spies. But I took them upstairs and I hid them amidst all the stalks of flax. And that's where we kept our flax, so it could dry up on the roof. And I hid them. There was no way they could be found. And as I was coming down the stairs, I heard this pounding on the door. And I thought, is this my heart pounding? Or is that knocking on my door? So I go to the door, and they open. And again, not unusual, but these men were from the king. And I could tell they meant business. Not the kind of business that I meant. And they asked me, have you seen the spies? So I said, yes. Yes, I saw them, and they were here. But I don't know where they went. I don't even know where they came from. But I know that they were here recently. So if you go now and pursue them, you will overtake them. They closed the door. They were satisfied. And they went on their way. I lied. So quickly I ran to the roof. And I found the men, still hiding. You see, I was used to hiding men. And I told them, your God is the God of heaven above and the God of earth below. Swear to me now, because I have dealt kindly with you, that you will deal kindly with me and my father and my mother and my brother and my sisters and all the people of my father's household, and that we will be saved, that you and your army will save us. Do you know what they said? They said, because you have dealt kindly with us, we will deal kindly with you if you tell no one that we were here. And if you take a scarlet thread, a cord, and hang it out your window, so that when we return with Joshua and our men, we will know where you are, you and your father and your mother and all of your family, and we will save you. That was incredible good news for me. So I told them, I said, I'm going to let you down by this cord, this scarlet cord, out my window, and you must run to the caves and hide for 3 days. That way I knew that for 3 days they would be hidden and they would not be found. So they did. They did just as I told them. And then, days later, we heard the footsteps. We heard the sounds of thousands and thousands of men and women and children coming to our city. And for 7 days, they surrounded our wall. And they marched. And then on the 7th day, they blew this sound of these trumpets, these incredible instruments, and blaring and noise and chaos. But I knew that the 2 spies would remember to look for that scarlet thread out my window, and we were saved. And then the walls fell down, and our people were destroyed. But me and my family, we got to live in Israel for the rest of my life and all of my days. And oh, by the way, I got married. I married a man named Salmon, and we had a baby, a little boy, and we named him Boaz.
Hey, Carol, how are you?
Good.
You did such a fabulous job telling
you.
us the story of Rahab as Rahab. So
Interesting story.
It is an
Lots
interesting
of little
story.
things that I'm sure you're going to cover for us.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story, and one of the things that I think is peculiar is, why is Rahab a hero of the faith, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
she's talked about twice. Rahab the harlot. It's like, give a woman a break. Can't we just be Rahab? But
and we know you're not really a harlot,
No, thank you.
Carol. But so she's identified as this hero of the faith in Hebrews 11 and James chapter 2. The New Testament is clear that she is a hero of the faith, but she doesn't have what we would think of as a normal story of a hero of the faith.
No.
She's a prostitute. She lies. She hides and sneaks. It's not exactly what you would imagine a hero of the faith to look like.
no, she goes from harlot to hero.
Yeah.
And woman of the red light to woman of the true light.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
so tell us how she got there. I mean, why? There's nobody else's profession in there, like Boaz the wheat field guy. It's Rahab the harlot.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think, again, on the surface level, she doesn't look like a hero. But notice that throughout the story, that her intent is preservation of life. She's trying to preserve life. She understands throughout the story that there's a higher law and a higher authority that she's loyal to.
Yeah.
And that she needs to protect these men. And that higher law is more important even than the law to not tell lies.
Wow.
That actually preserving life, protecting the vulnerable, is of more value than the commandment to not lie. She sort of intuitively understands that. And her story is also significant in human history because it was Christians living in Europe who read this story about Rahab during the Holocaust who
I know
said,
where you're going. Yeah.
who said it's more important to protect life, to protect these Israelites, these Jewish people from the Nazis, and who are willing to lie to the Nazis in order to protect life. And so it has an important place, not just in many, many years ago in the Bible, but even in our current era where Christians have turned to this story and said the heroic thing to do sometimes is to tell a lie to preserve life. And so often that's what Jesus teaches in his ministry, is that people were so intent on observing the letter of the law that they would neglect the spirit of the law. And they would
the
would
letter
actually,
of the law kills.
Yeah.
But the spirit of the law gives life.
Right. Exactly. And they'd be so intent on observing all these little minutia of the law and neglect the weightier matters of the law, which is to love God and love people. And that's what she does in this story for us, and illustrates so beautifully that the faith is about loving God. She aligns herself not with the pagan gods, but with the God of the Israelites. And she loves these people that are in her care and protects them. So, Carol, I want to ask you a question.
Okay.
When you were playing
Is it
Rahab,
multiple choice?
yeah, when you were playing Rahab,
Okay.
you mentioned in there that your son was a certain person. Who was that person, and why is that significant?
Salmon and I had a son, Boaz.
And what's significant about Boaz?
Boaz is in the lineage of Jesus that you can find in Matthew. And so, let's see, Boaz begot Obed, and Obed Jesse, and of course, Jesse, King David. And then begat. So, to Jesus. So, I consider Rahab the mini great grandma of our Savior, of our hero Jesus.
Yeah, so she
A
has...
harlot.
Yeah, so a prostitute, a non-Jewish woman, has an integral place in the descendants, in the ancestry of Jesus. That she's the great grandmother of Jesus. That she's the great grandmother of Jesse, the great grandmother of David, King David. So she has this important place. And I think one of the things that I take away from that is that that God already through this story is showing how the faith can include anybody. Anybody is welcome to come in to God's kingdom. All are invited in. And that in Jesus' lineage itself already there is a blessing to the nations, a calling of people from different tribes, tongues, and peoples into the people of God.
He can use anybody and anything, anywhere. And you know what? Another point I liked about that story, if you think about Rahab, a foreigner, takes in the Israelites, peace, greets them kindly, peace, fellowship, redemption. And then later on, what does her son, her very son Boaz do? Takes in a foreigner, the peace, the fellowship, and the redemption of Ruth, which leads to Jesus, which leads to our redemption.
That's so encouraging to my faith, to just see how the Lord works through everyone. And for all those who have these, understand that the core of the law, the core of the faith is loving God and loving people. There's a place for them in our story too, and in God's story.
I agree.
I hope you guys have a great Bible study.
Don't forget sharing life. Love God, love people, and share life.
Our mission statement, that's right. Thank you, Carol, so much, and wonderful job playing Rahab and bringing that story to life for us.
Great. Thanks.